My name is Nikhil Chandrappa. I'm a software engineer in the ecosystem team of YugabyteDB, where we work with popular developer tools like Spring Framework, GraphQL, and host of other projects. And also I'm a lead engineer on the Spring Data YugabyteDB, where we collaborated with the VMware engineering team to implement this project. And I want to give a huge shout out to Mark Paluch, who was the lead Spring Data engineer. He helped us providing feedback and providing us guidance on the implementation and also the code review. In today's session, what we are going to do is we are going to talk about how the existing Spring Data ecosystem looks like and what are the things that we have implemented in the Spring Data YugabyteDB project itself. So before we get into that, we all know, right, like the Spring support for the databases is very mature. So there are like two categories of projects, the relational projects as well as non-relational projects. So in relational, you have the JPA and JDBCs, and non-relational, there's like host of other projects like Cassandra, Mongo. And all these things, what they are providing is they are providing like a common set of APIs for app developers to use, right, for running CRUD operations. It made sense for Spring to come up with all these integrations, which kind of simplifies the developer work. And since Spring Data YugabyteDB or the YSQL API is a relational API as well, but what led us to like implementing Spring Data YugabyteDB is we had to map all the distributed SQL features that we have in Yugabyte to the well-known Spring APIs that are out there out there in Spring Framework, so that an app developer need not spend a lot of time ramping up understanding the distributed SQL features. So that's why we came up with, we designed and implemented Spring Data YugabyteDB. So Spring Data YugabyteDB provides Yugabyte specific YSQL template and repositories for enabling the generic CRUD operations that Spring Data provides. And also it has annotation based programming support using enable repositories. And we have a few others in the roadmap, which kind of maps to Yugabyte as features. And also things like the transaction manager. And one thing that I want to call out is Spring Data YugabyteDB by default uses Yugabyte smart driver, which kind of enables your microservices to become cluster aware, which means your relational Spring Boot application will know the availability of the entire cluster. Since Yugabyte is a multi-node system or the multi-node cluster, your microservices will also be able to kind of discover all the nodes in your cluster. As in when a new node gets added on scale up and scale down, all those things will be by default enabled in Spring Data YugabyteDB. So we'll explain that in depth as we go ahead in the presentation. For now, these are the high level features we are going to support or we have implemented in Spring Data YugabyteDB. To get started, I know we all have to have the dependency that we are going to use. So the Spring Data YugabyteDB project is under the com.yugabyte group ID. And the current, the API we support is the YSQL API. So the YSQL API is our relational API. So all the topics that we are going to touch upon today is targeted towards YSQL. And Spring Data project is a extension, or it's kind of based on the upstream Spring Data relational and the Spring Data JDBC project, where we have extended the existing APIs to have Yugabyte specific features enabled, like the transaction manager, the dialects, as well as the templates, right? So those are the ones where we had to extend existing APIs so that it can support distributed SQL features in YugabyteDB. And I just wanted to quickly talk about the compatibility matrix we have. So in our compatibility matrix, you can see that we do support the regular Postgres driver as well as our smart driver. So the smart driver feature is enabled post Yugabyte 2.7. So if you are having a YugabyteDB cluster which is prior to 2.7, you will still use the Postgres JDBC driver. So that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. So, but by default, the YugabyteDB or SDYB project will use the smart driver features. As you know, like one of the main USPs of, you might know, like one of the main USPs of working with Spring Data is like it's a repository support, right? It kind of provides you prevents you by running like a lot of boilerplate code. You don't have to create your data source objects. You don't have to like create create the query objects and things like that. Spring actually provides implementation for all the implementation of the boilerplate code required for running the query itself. So that's the one other thing that we had to extend the existing JDBC repository to support YSQL repository so that it makes use of the Yugabyte specific transaction managers. And like all the existing support you might have with the JDBC repository will continue to work with Yugabyte as well. But one additional thing advantage you're gonna get is as and when we add new features in our the core database itself, like the follower reads and things like that. So those will be automatically supported using YSQL repository. For today, it is at par with what you would get with JDBC repository. And as and when our features improve on that, our features gets implemented on the server side, we are going to add those features support in the client or the SDYB project as well. And it follows the similar pattern where we are gonna have or we are gonna define an interface, and which is going to extend the YSQL repository, and by default it will provide all the regular APIs like save, find by ID, find all, and all those things are provided. And as an app developer, all you would have to do is just auto wire this or put it in your service or the API methods so that you can start doing CRUD operations against YugabyteDB database. As I said, the follower reads and the semantics around that will also be implemented such that you wouldn't have to you wouldn't have to implement something out of the norm. So it will still continue to like follow the existing patterns we have in Spring Data projects. We will see like how we implement the repository pattern in one of the demo applications we have, which I'm gonna explain as we go ahead in this presentation. And in any Spring Data project, right, the one thing that all those projects will provide is like abstract configuration, right? Like what all the beans that we have to configure, so that we don't want the developer to take care of that. So even with Spring Data YB, we have abstract Yugabyte JDBC configuration, which kind of sets up all the templates, transaction manager, mappers, and converters. And as I said, by default, we'll have the cluster-aware data source, where we are going to configure like the JDBC URL and the credentials that are required for configuring or connecting to the YugabyteDB cluster itself. By default, obviously, like if you don't want to use any connection pooling, you don't need to use Hikari. But we kind of went with this recommendation where we want to have a Hikari pool or a connection pool so that we have a better utilization of connection handling. So that's why you see in our data source creation, so we are using Hikari pool. So you may ask, like, why are we explicitly creating data source? So the current project is the pure Spring Data YB project. When we add the Spring Boot capability, like the auto reconfiguration will take care of implementing the data source for us. That is on our roadmap, and we are going to implement it soon. If you have any questions regarding the cluster-aware data source and the abstract configuration, you can feel free to ask in the chat. So I'll answer those questions after this session during the live Q&A. One other important feature we had to add as part of our implementation is introduction of query options. As you might know, like some of the features in YugabyteDB kind of like differs in syntax the way it would work in Postgres to Yugabyte, where Yugabyte, we might have to specify a few additional properties, like how our transaction will work on the server side, and how our data sharding will work, or how our like the query patterns will work, whether it is always going to the leader, whether it can go to the follower. So there is like bunch of properties you can configure for each query you fire against Yugabyte. So in order to support that programmatically, we introduce query options. So query options will support all the Yugabyte specific features. So this is where all the features that Yugabyte supports, like differable reach, follower reach, and all those things can be programmatically like enabled, rather than like implementing or creating the SQL connection or the SQL statement itself. So that's why we kind of took some of the other inspiration from some other Spring Data projects where they were using query options for configuring the like per query request. So that's why we also introduced the query options, where YSQL template is going to support query options for all the like Yugabyte specific queries you might want to run, right? So right now it supports deferrable reads. Okay. Apart from that, the Spring Data YugabyteDB also has ORM support. So Spring Data YB has very lightweight ORM support, which means it doesn't have the richness of the entire JPA or the Hibernate framework, where you can do all the relational mappings or the relationship mappings. So what we want to support out of this ORM is enable the annotations to support Yugabyte specific DDL creations, which means like the table creations for the table definitions for hash partitioning or range partitioning. How do you specify table spaces? So those things we want to extend the existing JDBC ORM to support Yugabyte features there. So right now, that is the existing piece of work we are handling. Whatever the Spring Data JDBC mapping that is available currently, those will continue to work with Spring Data YugabyteDB project. And as you could see, there are like multiple Spring Data projects out there. Based on the existing explanation, whatever we went through so far, you might have figured, okay, a bunch of inspiration is coming from other Spring Data projects. That is actually true, but in Spring Data YugabyteDB project, what we are trying to achieve is there is like a lot of control we get onto like implementing the features which are dedicated to Yugabyte. So that's why if you want to have annotation based driven implementations and transaction manager, the dialect, and which are dedicated to Yugabyte, there is like very subtle differences, but still you would have to do a lot of additional configurations if you do not use YugabyteDB. So that's why we want to avoid those, and we went ahead and implemented Spring Data YugabyteDB. But you are someone who are like dedicatedly looking or using Hibernate or the JPA for like creating your entities and manipulating your entities. So you will still continue to use JPA. So this is not a replacement for the full JPA or Hibernate. So the Spring Data YB project is its sweet spot is where you are looking for a lightweight ORM, and which will work well with the entire Spring Data ecosystem or the Spring microservices. So that's where the Spring Data YugabyteDB project is targeting. Cool. And this is where this is how we are seeing our like users the whatever the feedback we are getting using the YugabyteDB project. So obviously, like I'll not spend some time or spend time on the how the top level cloud native projects like Ribbon and all those things work, but you can mix all those dependencies along with Spring Data. I mean the Spring Data YugabyteDB project, and you can easily make this entire stack work against YugabyteDB. So there isn't a lot of changes you would have to do, as I'll show you next. So the entire ecosystem of the Spring microservices or the Spring Cloud Native projects will work with Spring Data YugabyteDB also, as well as the core database. What you get as an app developer is the advantage of linear scalability and avoiding like load balancers and having high availability. Those are the things you get out of the box for your microservices using these projects, or using Spring Data YB with YugabyteDB. Perfect. Okay. This all I had as part of the rundown itself of all the different features we do support in Spring Data YugabyteDB. Now let's see how we can use this use the project to create create the application itself, right? So for this, we kind of chosen Spring Pet Clinic demo application. So Spring Pet Clinic is like one of the popular Spring Boot applications out there. I remember back from my time at Pivotal, where this was like one of the most popular applications that was there during Spring 1. So we went ahead and we ported over the entire application into Spring Data YugabyteDB, all the YugabyteDB specific annotation and repositories. That is what we are going to see now. The project itself, and quick one thing that I wanted to call out, the Spring Data YugabyteDB project is actually as part of the community modules on the Spring Data page. And if you want to find more details, you can go to this page, and which will get you to the YugabyteDB, the Spring Data YugabyteDB docs. Okay, let me go back to the, I want to take a pause, which can be, so this, how much long am I? Like, what's the
17
time?
minutes in.
17 minutes in, okay. Okay, perfect. Let's look at the actual code that went to build the Spring Data Yugabyte, the Spring Pet Clinic demo application. So it's also like, if you want to like quickly take a look at how the project, how the project is laid out, you can go to Yugabyte Pet Clinic Spring Data YugabyteDB project. As you can see, like in every Spring Data project, we'll have like the domain objects that are specific to this, right? And also the repository object. So what we did is we took away we extended or changed all the code here from JDBC repository to the YSQL repository. And one thing that I want to show you is the configuration file, how we are using the Yugabyte specific data source itself. So it's here where you could see like all the data source, how it's getting implemented. As you could see, like we are extending the abstract Yugabyte JDBC configuration file, where we are getting the connection string as well as the driver that is required. And you can take a look. As you could see there, we are kind of defaulting to the Postgres driver, because the project works with both JDBC smart driver as well as the regular Postgres driver. That's why if you don't want to use on your class path, if you don't have the smart driver, we by default, we want to fall back onto the regular driver. Getting back to the actual Spring Pet Clinic app itself, as you can see, we have clearly laid out like what are the different APIs we are supporting in this, and which is the YSQL, like the repository method it is using, and what is the corresponding generated query looks like. So some of these things which you could see, it's like pretty straightforward, but as and when you get into a more complex kind of business use cases, the advantages of using the repository methods will become more relevant for you guys. For now, we have a bunch of tables that we have, and we have owners, pet, and visits, and veterinary doctors. Like those are the set of tables that we have. And the app itself is working against YugabyteDB cloud instance. So the app actually, like when we start it up, it's gonna run like all the schema migration required for creating the tables. So that is like one way we could avoid needing a full-blown JPA like Hibernate. So we can have the schema migration tools to go ahead and maintain the schema for us. So that is much more simpler in the cloud native design pattern than the old school way of doing like the JPA based ORM mapping. So this kind of segregates the like the responsibilities of maintaining maintaining the entity objects as well as the tables. So that's why we kind of went in this pattern where we have our flyway schema migration doing the table creations, and we are using the Spring Data YugabyteDB project only for querying the data and inserting the data. I'll quickly just go over a few things here. If we want to go over the project, you will have something like find owners. You can find all the owners in the database. I'll click on find owners. As you can see, like these are like some of the owners that are available in our database. I can go click on a owner, and the owner details comes up here, and whatever the APIs that we use for displaying this the backend displaying the backend data are actually listed as part of this demo application. So this actually like gives you like a good sample for getting started with YugabyteDB, as well as how to work with SDYB to quickly bootstrap your Spring Boot application for your particular use case. And also it will, if you are something that you want to quickly have a YugabyteDB clusters stood up, you can use the YB cloud, which has like a free tier instance, and it is free for lifetime. And you can do all your prototyping and things like that here. And whenever you are ready to like move to like your production traffic, then you can change from free tier to the actual cloud offering that we have. Cool. So that's about how easy is it for somebody to get started with Spring and YugabyteDB. And as part of this, I just wanted to call out like what are the steps that app developer is going to take for creating the Spring microservice application, right? So it is very straightforward. Like all you need to use these 5 simple steps using the Spring Data YugabyteDB project. You get the right dependencies in your POM file or Gradle file, and annotate all your domain models with the required entity mappings, and use the cluster aware data source for creating a connection to YugabyteDB cluster. And that's it. You'll have a repository which is going to enable the CRUD operations against the YugabyteDB cluster. So which you can auto wire into your service methods or APIs for doing CRUD operations. So which these 5 or 5 simple steps or 5 simple configurations in your Spring Boot application, you can build a microservice which is going to connect against a scalable YugabyteDB cluster. That's how simple it is for us to get started with YugabyteDB. And as and when we have we get feedback from you on what are the pain points you see currently using the Spring Data YugabyteDB project, or if you're manually trying to do something, please reach out to us on Slack or on our forum, where if you give that feedback, we'll be happy to consider that and implement it in our Spring Data YugabyteDB project. It's much more easier for us to implement rather than going through the Spring Data projects. So it will be very, since we are dedicatedly working on this, it will be easier for us to start implementing those enhancements that are required. Similarly, I just wanted to give a brief on the roadmap itself. So the roadmap, as I had mentioned during the presentation, there's like few things that are coming in the cluster side. The follower reads, which is one of the important features that we have, where you don't always have to go to the leader partition or the wherever the leader data is sitting. So if you are running like a dashboard or some of those kind of applications, it will be like much easier to go to a follower, and you can retrieve the information much faster. The latency will be much lesser going to the followers. So that is what that is currently like actively being developed on the server side. So in order to make it available, rather than having like a custom SQL statements for that, in Spring Data YugabyteDB project, we want to support annotation, where you can annotate a repository method with @reader follower, and the project knows that it can go to a follower node to retrieve the information. And similarly, we want to support hint information using annotations. And as I said, slight extensions to the ORM mappings to support hash and range partitioning that we support in Yugabyte. So those are some of the things that are coming in our roadmap. If you have any questions on the roadmap items, you can ask me in the chat. I will respond to them during the live Q&A session. Cool. That's all I had, folks, for today's presentation. And you can join our Slack, and there is a dedicated channel for discussing everything Spring. And if you have any use cases that you are solving with microservices, we are super happy to talk to you guys on that. And also you can start our YugabyteDB project. And we are also looking for people looking to contribute to the project. We'll be happy to work with you as well. Thank you.